I've essentially said that there are two kinds of identity. There are vertical identities, which are passed down generation to generation. Those vertical identities, as they come along, include, for example, ethnicity, nationality, in most cases, language. There are many qualities that are passed down from parent to child. If you have a vertical identity, your parents are likely to reinforce it. So you could make the argument that it's quite difficult in society as it's currently constructed to be black or to be South Asian, and yet if you are either of those things, you have this in common with your parents, and your parents are likely to give you a sense of pride in who you are. There are also what I've called horizontal identities, identities that someone doesn't have in common with his parents, and that he must therefore learn from a peer group, a horizontal peer group. So you have gay children born to straight parents, for example. They don't come to a sense of identity from their parents, who are likely to wish that they were different. And so being gay is such an identity. Most deaf children are born to hearing parents, most dwarfs to parents of average height. Most people with schizophrenia have parents who don't suffer from mental illness. Most people who are transgender are born to parents who are quite happy in their birth genders. And I wanted to look at what happens when you have these identities. And what happens is, almost universally, that an effort is made to cure or obliterate that identity, and that the child has to go through a real process of discovery in order to emerge with a positive sense of himself. I am the gay child of straight parents, and when I was a small child I had dyslexia, and my mother was very helpful to me in overcoming the dyslexia. I still have it, but I function very well despite it. When I came out of the closet as gay, I think there was really a feeling that my family would have liked to figure out a way for me to get over that too, and that was very toxic. And one of the central questions when you have a child who has a quality of profound difference is what the differences are that can be changed, what the differences are that can't be changed, and how you tell the difference between them. I saw how difficult it is for parents to accept having children who are different, who they discover one day have to communicate in a language that's unknown to them. And I ended up thinking my parents had done a reasonably good job of it, but it was that kernel of anger that really was the origin of the book. I found that while one assumes that everything will be easier for families who have more resources, that wasn't always entirely the case. On the one hand, people who have more resources can afford more help, and the last thing I want to do is to say that it's better to be poor. Everything is easier for people who have more resources at one level. But I also found that people with more resources tended to believe that all problems are fixable, and they set about trying to fix their children, and they were terribly frustrated when it didn't quite work out. Whereas parents who had fewer resources and who had never been able to seize control of or to fix the situation of their children, those families, time and again, were better at acceptance. I became fascinated by this idea as I was looking at the debate around the cochlear implant, which was used for deaf people. It provides a sort of facsimile of hearing. And when it was developed, its developers, and indeed most people out in the world, assumed that this was a glorious breakthrough, and that now finally those poor deaf people without hearing would be able to hear, and wasn't it fantastic? And of course, for many people that is fantastic, but there are others who have a strong sense that they belong not to a community of people who are damaged, but rather to a subculture with a language group, sign language, which ties them together. People in the deaf community, and that deaf community who were very political, felt that the advent of the cochlear implant was meant to wipe out their community, and they referred to it as genocide. And I was very torn, and I thought to myself, well, if somebody suddenly invented a technology which would prevent people from being gay, I'll bet it would catch on in no time. And how would I feel about the idea that that gay culture was being removed from the world? So I wanted to look at the tension between these two models, and I wanted to see what the cochlear implant debate really implied. One of the arguments that got made by people who were opposing the implant is that it should not be given to very young children, that children should grow up and then decide whether they wanted an implant. But that's an incoherent argument for two reasons. One of which is that the implant is most effective for the acquisition of oral language if it's implanted early. And the other is because if you get an implant when you're 20, after growing up as a deaf person using sign language, you're deciding to turn into a different person at 20, and you're rejecting the entire experience of your childhood and adolescence. In the end, I think I probably, if I had had a deaf child, would have considered a cochlear implant very seriously, because I think it's easier to be hearing. And in the end, I feel that if as a society we eliminate the deaf culture entirely, it will be a grievous, terrible loss to the world in which a diversity of human experience is necessary to sustain the ecosystem of human experience. So the personal wish and the social wish are sometimes in opposition, and the tension between them I found very compelling and sometimes very bewildering. I think I'm a completely different parent than I would have been without the work on this book. The book taught me, in the first place, that children will be different from their parents, and that part of the obligation of parenthood is not just to mold your child into a facsimile of yourself, but to learn to accept and love your child as a completely separate and often disturbingly different person. But more profoundly, I think I was worried that I might not be able to love a child who was different or who presented difficulties, that I might be one of those parents who gives up. And the lessons in resilience that I got from all of these families gave me a kind of confidence going forward. People said to me, "It's extraordinary that you decided to have children in the midst of working on this book about everything that can go wrong." And I said, to me, it's actually a book not about everything that can go wrong, but about how strong love can be even when everything goes wrong. And meeting all of these other parents was something that was humbling in many ways, but it did nonetheless give me a sense of what parental love really looked like, of how strong it could be, and a feeling of greater confidence as I tried to achieve it myself.